Today we will explore the hidden dangers of medieval European cities, a world where the promise of freedom and prosperity lived side by side with constant threats of violence, crime, and sudden death. Before continuing with the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more documentary narratives like this one. Imagine yourself walking through narrow and winding streets where the smell of open sewers mixes with the aroma of freshly baked bread. Wooden houses lean over one another, blocking out almost all sunlight. The sound of hammers striking anvils echoes through the alleys, occasionally interrupted by the shouts of street vendors or the distant bell of a church. This was the daily setting of medieval cities, places that represented both the hope of a better life and the risk of meeting an untimely end in a poorly lit corner. For centuries, European cities of the Middle Ages were centers of trade, craftsmanship, and religious power. They were also the most densely populated places in the known Western world. London, Paris, Florence, York, Cologne, and dozens of other urban centers attracted thousands of people from rural areas in search of opportunities that the feudal countryside simply could not offer. A popular saying of the time stated that city air makes men free, referring to the charters of rights that guaranteed certain protections to urban inhabitants against feudal obligations. However, this freedom came at a high price, and not all dangers came from feudal lords or invading armies. To truly understand the risks of living in a medieval city, we first need to understand how these settlements were organized. Unlike modern metropolises, with their residential neighborhoods clearly separated from commercial and industrial zones, medieval cities were a tangle of overlapping functions. The house of a wealthy merchant could be pressed against the workshop of a tanner, whose work exhaled nauseating odors day and night. The imposing cathedral stood just steps away from noisy taverns, where deadly brawls were not uncommon. This mix of social classes and economic activities meant that crime was not confined to any specific neighborhood. On any street at any moment, an unsuspecting inhabitant could become a victim of thieves, murderers, or simply a fight that escalated into fatal violence. The walls that surrounded practically every medieval city of importance served multiple purposes. Primarily, they were defensive structures against external invaders, bandits, and enemy armies. Built of stone or brick, with watchtowers at regular intervals, these walls represented enormous investments of resources and labor that demonstrated the power and wealth of the communities that erected them. However, they also created a peculiar environment of enclosure. Space within the walls was limited and extremely valuable, which led builders to erect houses increasingly higher, with upper floors projected beyond the lower ones to gain living space. The resulting streets were so narrow that neighbors in opposite buildings could literally shake hands through their windows. This population density brought direct consequences for public safety. Studies based on records from medieval coroners, inquests in England, reveal impressive numbers regarding urban violence at the time. In Oxford at the beginning of the 14th century, the homicide rate was estimated between 60 and 75 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants. To put this number in perspective, this rate was approximately 50 times higher than the rates observed in contemporary English cities. A person was more likely to be murdered than to die in an accident. Historians who have extensively studied these records state that practically every inhabitant of a medieval city, if they did not personally witness a murder, knew someone who had been killed violently. The city gates were closed at dusk, and the ringing of bells announced the start of the curfew period. This ringing, known as couvre-feu in French, the origin of the modern word curfew, originally meant cover the fire, a reference to the need to extinguish fireplace flames to prevent fires during the night. With the gates closed and the fires out, cities plunged into almost total darkness, illuminated only by the flickering light of occasional torches and the pale glow of the moon when the sky was clear. It was in this environment of darkness that the true dangers emerged from the shadows. Night watch in medieval cities was at best rudimentary and inefficient. The system known as watch and ward in England had roots in 13th century legislation, particularly in the Statute of Winchester. According to these laws, each city was to maintain a contingent of men charged with patrolling the streets during the night, guarding the gates and detaining any suspicious person found wandering after the curfew. In practice, however, these watchmen were often ordinary citizens fulfilling a rotating obligation, without specialized training and armed only with spears or clubs. In London, there were approximately 6 watchmen for each city gate and 6 for each administrative ward, a ratio of approximately 1 watchman for every 400 inhabitants. Coverage was clearly insufficient to maintain order in dark streets filled with potential threats. The night watchman had the task of announcing the hours, checking if doors were locked, watching for fires, and ensuring that drunks and vagrants were handed over to the local constable. Some documents from the period report that these men frequently did not fulfill their duties with the expected zeal. Records show watchmen who spent the whole night drinking and smoking tobacco in cookshops after the curfew, instead of patrolling the streets as they should. Others were flagrantly corrupt, accepting bribes to let suspects pass or extorting money from people they found after the permitted hours. In one documented case in London, a watchman was brought before the authorities along with a woman accused of improper behavior after having been discovered accepting payment to let her escape while he was escorting her to prison. Medieval taverns occupied a central place in urban social life, functioning as an alternative to churches, as spaces for community coexistence. However, they were also notorious hubs of criminality and uncontrolled violence. Unlike modern bars with their strict regulations, the taverns and alehouses of the Middle Ages served as meeting places for all types of people. A detailed study of crimes in taverns in the city of Dubrovnik in the 14th century revealed that fights and assaults accounted for 57% of all documented infractions. The combination of abundant alcohol, often illegal gambling, and men carrying knives or swords created a volatile environment where any insult could quickly escalate into fatal violence. The insults exchanged in these medieval taverns were particularly virulent and personal. Court records preserve vivid examples of the provocations that led to bloodshed. One man accused of shouting that another's mother was a prostitute and a witch, another calling his opponent an illegitimate bastard with no right to inheritance or honor. Pulling someone's beard was considered a very serious provocation in the culture of the time, almost certain to result in a violent confrontation. Tavern owners, far from being neutral moderators seeking to appease conflicts, often got involved in the fights or even started them. In a case recorded in 1374, a tavern keeper named Sridan accused a customer of having assaulted him, but the testimony of another establishment owner revealed that Sridan himself had started the fight after refusing to accept payment for a broken jar. The clientele of the taverns was predominantly male. A survey indicates that 95% of the patrons documented in criminal cases were men from various occupations. Women rarely entered these establishments except to buy wine to take home or to accompany their husbands. The reason for this absence was clear to any observer. Life in the taverns was frequently violent and therefore dangerous for women. When women appeared in tavern-related criminal records, their offenses tended to involve theft or verbal insults, rather than direct physical violence. Interestingly, however, 6% of female infractions were classified as armed robbery, a surprisingly high percentage considering the risk of violent confrontation that such a crime implied. In addition to taverns, other commercial establishments presented specific risks for inhabitants and visitors of medieval cities. Barbershops, for example, were places of danger not because of direct violence, but for another completely different and more subtle reason. Medieval barbers often worked outdoors, usually on busy corners of commercial streets, and maintained a constant stream of conversation with their customers, with neighborhood idlers, and with anyone passing by. This seemingly harmless chatter meant that any stranger who stopped there would quickly be noticed and commented upon. In a world where criminals operated based on information about potential targets, the presence of a confused or visibly wealthy outsider would soon reach the ears of local thieves and muggers who would lie in wait. Brothels represented another category of establishments where danger was almost guaranteed. In medieval cities, prostitution existed in a legal gray area, tolerated in some places and persecuted in others, but always present in the shadows of urban life. These establishments attracted not only customers in search of services, but also thieves, swindlers, and all sorts of criminals who saw the patrons as easy and vulnerable targets. Records from the time indicate that a visitor to a brothel had an excellent chance of being robbed, either by the prostitute herself, by accomplices who assisted her, or by other criminals who loitered around these locations awaiting opportunities. The shame associated with being a victim of robbery in such a place often prevented the injured parties from reporting the crimes to the authorities, perpetuating a cycle of impunity that benefited criminals. Markets, which were the commercial heart of medieval cities, also functioned as stages for all sorts of offenses. Market days attracted enormous crowds, not just of local residents, but of merchants and peasants from surrounding villages. In this mass of bodies, pickpockets and thieves found ideal conditions to operate. A skillful hand could cut the purse attached to the belt of a distracted merchant in seconds, disappearing into the crowd before the victim even realized their loss. Certain neighborhoods acquired particularly grim reputations over the centuries. In Paris, the alleys and courtyards that became known as the Cour des Miracles, or Court of Miracles, were strongholds of beggars, thieves, and all sorts of outcasts who found refuge there. The curious name derived from a phenomenon well documented by chroniclers of the time. During the day, the beggars who operated in the Parisian streets displayed all kinds of deformities, blindness, and mutilations that aroused the pity of generous passers-by. At night, however, when they returned to their refuges in these hidden courtyards, the miracle occurred. Bandages were removed, crutches discarded in a corner, and eyes that seemed blind saw perfectly again. The disabilities were all feigned, elaborate schemes to maximize the charity of others. These marginal neighborhoods had their own hierarchies and codes of conduct that rivaled the city's official structures in complexity. Beggars organized themselves into almost guild-like structures, with leaders who coordinated territories and collected portions of each member's earnings. Some groups developed their own slang, coded languages that allowed communication without outsiders understanding what was said. This criminal organization was so structured that authorities often found themselves powerless to combat it. Attempts to clean up the Parisian courts of miracles failed repeatedly until, in the 17th century, the city's first organized police force was established under the leadership of Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie. Artisan neighborhoods presented their own distinctive risks. The workshops of tanners, dyers, and blacksmiths were dangerous workplaces, but also centers of intense rivalries between competing professionals. Medieval coroners' records in York document numerous cases of fatal feuds between artisans of the same profession. Knife fights between tannery workers, deadly violence between glove makers, and murders involving members of different guilds were depressingly common occurrences. In a notorious case from 1325, 12 men from the Goldsmiths' Guild of London went out through the streets of the important commercial thoroughfare of Cheapside, specifically to beat members of the Saddlers' Guild with whom they had a dispute. The violence resulted in serious injuries, with one man having his leg nearly severed by an axe and another being beaten with a staff while he lay helpless on the ground. The geography of violence in medieval cities followed patterns that modern historians have managed to map through the meticulous analysis of court records. Homicides were not distributed uniformly across urban space. On the contrary, they concentrated in specific points, often high-traffic locations such as markets, main thoroughfares, port areas, and ceremonial spaces. In medieval London, busy streets, squares, and quays accounted for 68% of all documented homicide cases. These patterns reveal a counterintuitive truth about medieval violence. The wealthiest and busiest neighborhoods were often the most dangerous, while poor and peripheral areas saw fewer recorded homicides. Sundays were the deadliest days of the medieval week. Almost a third of all documented homicides occurred on this day. The reason was simple. After the morning obligation to attend Mass, Sunday afternoon was dedicated to leisure, which meant drinking, gambling, and socializing in taverns and public spaces. Tensions accumulated during the work week found an outlet on weekends, and alcohol reduced the inhibitions that normally kept conflicts under control. Violence, reached its peak in the hours surrounding the curfew in the early evening, when men left the taverns and met in the dark streets. Medieval men went about armed as a daily practice. Knives and swords of various types and sizes were routinely carried by all social classes, and the majority of homicides were committed with these weapons. In 68% of cases analyzed in London, blades were responsible for the deaths. Coroners' records often specified the exact type of knife used, using a variety of technical terms that indicate the diversity of bladed weapons in circulation. 19% of homicides involved the use of wooden staffs reinforced with iron tips, blunt weapons effective in close combat. The upper part of the body was the preferred target. 42% of all wounds were inflicted on the head, neck, and throat. Night was the period of greatest absolute danger in medieval cities. After the curfew bell, the streets belonged to criminals, to the often ineffective watchmen, and to animals that roamed freely. Pigs, stray dogs, and rats competed for the waste accumulated in the alleys. The almost total absence of lighting transformed every shadow into a potential hiding place for muggers. Those who had urgent business after dark hired torchbearers to accompany them, but even these served more to light the path than to provide real protection. The universal advice of experienced residents was simple and direct. Do not go out after dark unless it is absolutely necessary. Fires represented another constant and devastating danger in medieval cities. Houses built predominantly of wood with thatched roofs or poorly fixed tiles were extremely flammable. A single knocked-over candle, a spark escaping from a fireplace, could start a conflagration that spread rapidly from building to building through the narrow streets. In 1135, a fire that began on London Bridge consumed a large part of the city, even damaging St. Paul's Cathedral. The authorities' response was the promulgation of the Assize of London in 1189, which mandated that the lower floors of new constructions be made of stone and the roofs of tile. For the hypothetical traveler who found themselves on the streets of a medieval European city, the rules of survival would be relatively simple, even if not always easy to follow in practice. Avoiding taverns would be the first piece of advice, or at least frequenting them with extreme caution and constant vigilance. Not drawing attention to oneself, especially if a foreigner, would be fundamental to surviving. Keeping distance from barbershops and places where gossip circulated freely would help prevent criminals from knowing of your presence and possible valuable possessions. Never entering brothels or gambling houses, regardless of the temptations offered. And above all, retiring before nightfall and not going out under any circumstances until the following dawn. Despite all these dangers, medieval cities continued to attract people from all backgrounds seeking to improve their lives. Urban life offered economic opportunities impossible in the rigidly stratified feudal countryside. Serfs, who managed to live in a city for a year and a day, could, in many places, gain their freedom from feudal obligations. Artisans could learn specialized trades and rise socially through the guilds that regulated each profession. Merchants could accumulate fortunes that rivaled those of the traditional land-based nobility. The resilience of medieval communities in the face of all these challenges is remarkable and worthy of admiration. Urban inhabitants developed mechanisms of adaptation and survival that allowed them to navigate daily dangers while taking advantage of the opportunities that city life offered. Guilds not only regulated trades, but also provided mutual support networks for their members, caring for the sick, widows, and orphans. Parishes organized religious life, but also functioned as neighborhood units where everyone knew and watched over one another. Medieval urban regulations reveal a degree of administrative sophistication that often surprises modern observers. Building codes, food hygiene standards, controls on weights and measures, prohibitions of certain polluting activities within the city walls, all these rules demonstrate that medieval authorities clearly understood their city's problems and actively tried to solve them within available resources. The walls that delimited medieval cities gradually lost their defensive importance as military technologies evolved. Some were demolished to allow for urban expansion, but others survived and can still be visited today. The walls of Carcassonne in France, Tallinn in Estonia, York and Canterbury in England offer contemporary visitors a physical window into this medieval world of intertwined opportunities and dangers. The history of medieval cities is ultimately a deeply human story of aspirations and fears, of creativity and violence, of community and conflict. The men and women who built these settlements and lived within their walls faced challenges that in many ways echo contemporary urban problems. Criminality, social inequality, tensions between different groups, struggles for space and resources are themes as relevant today as they were 700 years ago. The medieval city was simultaneously the most dangerous and the most promising place an ordinary person could inhabit in Western Europe. It was a melting pot where languages, cultures, social classes, and diverse occupations mixed. It was a laboratory of commercial, artistic, and intellectual innovations. It was also a brutal environment where life could be extinguished by a stabbing in a tavern, an uncontrolled fire, or a devastating epidemic. This tension between danger and promise defined the medieval urban experience and continues to resonate in the way we think about cities even today. If you have reached this point, walking with us through these dark alleys and dangerous squares of the medieval past, it means you share this passion for uncovering the mysteries of history. Each episode we produce is an open door to a forgotten world, an invitation to walk alongside people who lived, loved, worked, and died centuries before us. To continue this journey of discovery, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any new documentary narratives. Leave your comment telling us which aspect of medieval life you would like to explore in future videos. And if this story touched you in some way, share it with other curious minds who also appreciate diving into the depths of the past. Together, we keep alive the memory of those who came before us and whose lives, however distant they may seem, still have so much to teach us. Until the next journey through time.